Right. So, I just like to say welcome to you all. I'm sure there's a few more people who are going to be joining us. It's still kind of adding up in here. So a big warm welcome to all of you. My name is Inge Nickel and I'm the director at the Brazelton Centre here in the UK. And before we get started today, I'm just going to hand over to Sarah Lamb, our communications manager, who is just going to say a few words about Baby Communication Week.
Lovely, thank you, Inga. And I echo Inga's welcome to everyone. And thank you so much for all joining us today. You may or may not have been aware that this webinar today is part of a wider initiative this week. So this week is Baby Communication Week. That is running from yesterday all the way till Friday. And we really hope that you'll be able to join along with things happening during the week. So just very briefly to share what Baby Communication Week is for those of you who are new to it. So we're actually in our 6th year, and it's a week that is an awareness week. It's hosted by us at the Brazelton Centre, but it's celebrated all around the world. And really through events and networking and resources, we really aim to deepen understanding among parents, practitioners, health services, and the wider community about how babies are communicating and engaging in relationships really from the very beginning. We particularly want to emphasise the importance of recognising and responding to babies' cues and really being able to give babies a voice before they have words, but in helping them to build strong sensitive relationships with their parents and with the network around them. So we really hope you'll join us this week. You will find everything or most things that are happening will be on our social media channels. So we are on Instagram, Facebook, X, and LinkedIn. We also have a YouTube channel. We're releasing a video each day for parents. We're going to be visiting baby banks around the UK this week as well, to give some of our resources and run a session for parents. We really hope that everyone can get involved. Please feel free to share our content or to create your own. Just thank you so much for your support, and it's together that we can, make a big impact. So thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. So I am absolutely delighted to welcome Claudia Gold here today, who is going to be presenting and running this session today. So Claudia is a medical doctor. She's a pediatrician and writer who practiced general pediatrics for over 20 years and now specializes in early relational health. She has had clinical experience working in many different communities and speaks frequently to audiences of both parents and professionals. And Claudia, before I hand over to you, I just really, really want to share some feedback about your book that you literally have just published. Personally, I just think it's such a beautiful thing, and I'm looking forward to hearing more about this kind of actually being available in a session, because when I deliver a lot of training where we try and focus on the baby's voice and the parent's voice, we're often met with some anxieties about, well, how am I going to fit it in because I've got so many tasks to do, and it's thinking about how can we overcome the tasks. And so I'm really, really looking forward to your talk. And if I may, I just want to share what Bruce Perry has commented on your book, because I'm sure everybody here will know who Bruce Perry is, and he's written just a comment. It is the rare author who can weave the complexities of the brain, human development, parenting, family, culture, and history into a coherent and beautiful tapestry. Anyone working with children will find this enjoyable and engaging. So over to you, Claudia.
Well, it is such a delight to be here. Before I share my screen, I just want to say hello to everyone. I was actually recently in the UK, in Scotland, and then I will be in Australia in November. So at least two spots that I will be in person, but it's just really such a thrill to be with people from all around the world. And thank you, Sarah and Inga, for inviting me to this wonderful community. Okay, so let me share my screen. Oops. Oh. Okay, I was not supposed to start sharing my screen. Sorry about that. Huh.
Sorry,
I
just
can't.
a few polls coming up, which will help us think about, or will help Claudia as well with her presentation. So please, if you could just, you need to join the app when it comes up with the Mentimeter. And then if you can just press submit, that would be fantastic. Thank you. It's amazing to see this happening on the screen, and just seeing so many different places. We have Athens as well, and West Yorkshire. And we have got Cyprus. We've got Carol from Massachusetts, from Philadelphia, Brazil. Hi, Catherine from Durham. And we've got Japan. That's just amazing. Thank you. Are they still coming in, Sarah?
Yes, last few, and then we're just going to move on to the next one. We're just trying to get it to move along, so it should be up shortly.
Okay. We have our amazing tech team. Um, okay, the next one, if you could just put in what area you work in. Thank you. So a lot in public health, perinatal mental health, community, and we have other. If you're not presented here, do feel free to add it into the chat. Parent infant mental health services, psychotherapy, yeah. Oh, who have I got from? Hello, Thelma from Salt in Africa. And We Minds Matter in Greater Glasgow and Clyde. Okay. It'd be really helpful for us if you can let us know if you are NBAS or MBO trained, or if it's something that you're obviously not. Okay. Oh, somebody's booked into the training. We look forward to seeing you. Oh, hello, Tamari from Salt as well. So we've got quite a few who are endo trained. Okay.
This is the last one.
This is the last one, and do have a think about it. What runs through your mind as you're about to meet for the first time a family you're caring for? These are all really nice thoughts. How can I help? Lots of thoughts before we enter that family space. Okay. Over to you, Claudia.
Okay, so now I will share my screen. I just jumped the gun a bit there. Apologies. And here we go. just get this out of the way and get us on the first slide. Okay. So, well, that was such an interesting way to start a presentation. That's a new one for me. And I loved everybody's responses to that last question, because I think that really sort of sets us up for what I'm hoping to do with you all this morning. And I see a lot of you already kind of bought into the core concepts. I picked out two that I thought were particularly striking that I want us to think about as I go through. One was, will I be enough? So what I'm hoping is that I'm going to give you through this hour a kind of confidence in yourself to be able to feel secure that you will be enough. And then the second, which was really interesting, is my mind blank enough? And so what I'm going to argue here this morning is that actually your mind is not blank, because you have a tremendous amount of knowledge and experience that you bring to the encounter with the family. So the question is really, where is that in your way of being with a family in the moment? And so I'm hoping to move along so that we have a good amount of time for discussion, because I myself am curious to hear how people think about that. All right, so let me just dive into the content here. And these are questions that we can return to at the end. Again, I'm hoping I might leave out a couple of vignettes if I see we're getting later in the hour, so that we have enough time for discussion. But as we're going through, we already talked about the first question, but I want you all to think of a time when something unexpected was revealed in an interaction with a family, and how it happened and how it affected your time with them. And then this is the question about the blank mind. How does what we know, that is the scientific research evidence and our clinical experience, inform how we are in moment-by-moment engagement with families? And so let me just give you a little bit more background about how I ended up here. As Inga said, I started out in pediatric primary care. And I was working in a very busy practice in a rural community, going to deliveries in the middle of the night, like people used to do in the US. And I had the very good fortune to start studying at the Berkshire Psychoanalytic Institute, which opened 20 minutes from my house. And at the time, it was in the early 2000s, and there was a massive explosion in diagnosis of ADHD and even bipolar disorder in younger and younger children, which I found to be rather distressing. And I was exposed to this whole different way of understanding development and relationships that, as a pediatrician, I had not been exposed to, despite having very good education. And through that, then I was exposed to the world of infant parent mental health, which most pediatricians at the time had never heard of. And then through that, and I was a fellow and then a faculty member with Ed Tronick at UMass Boston. And that was then segued into my involvement in the field of early relational health. And I'm just going to land on that term for a moment, because many of you may use the term infant mental health. And here in the US, and I'm not sure how much this is spreading around the world, I'll be interested to hear from all of you, but there was kind of a recognition that people would look at you like you had three heads when you said infant mental health. Like, what does that mean? And so the words early relational health are kind of a reframing, which have more intrinsic meaning. That it's early means, childhood doesn't start at 3, it starts even at birth. So the early, and the fact that there is a tremendous amount of research and knowledge from a variety of fields that identifies the centrality of relationships between very young children and their caregivers, both for current and future health development and emotional well-being. So that's what I mean by the term early relational health, as very similar to the term infant mental health. And again, we can debate that if there is time. So what I'm going to do is give you an introduction to these two concepts, listening in and the not knowing stance. And then I'm going to give you a sampler of what the 4 perspectives of infant caregiver relationship and culture that I would argue we listen to all of those perspectives in a moment of interaction. And I'm going to weave in the relevant developmental science. If there are pressing questions while I'm talking, I would be happy to answer them. I do, again, hope that I can move along so that we have plenty of time to answer your questions also at the end. All right, so let me read a little vignette from the book that Inga mentioned, just to give you a flavor of what I'm talking about. I immediately sensed Jada's anguish as communicated through the rhythm and tone in her cracking voice in our scheduled phone consultation. The appointment occurred in 2020 during the early days of the COVID-19 pandemic, when we were all getting used to working in the virtual world. Her pediatrician had referred her to my practice when he noticed Jada's overwhelming anxiety in the face of a fussy and difficult to console newborn. As Jada launched into her story, the emotional pain poured out in a pressured rush. I instinctively held up my hands, even though she could not see me. Wait, I said, let's do FaceTime. A few minutes later, as we awkwardly navigated the unfamiliar use of technology, she, her husband Darius, and her son Clarence appeared on the screen. Instantly, Jada burst into tears, the flood of distress released after being briefly held at bay in the transition. Once her tears subsided, Jada explained that she felt overwhelmed with terror that she would never be able to breastfeed. I heard the feelings of shame and sense of failure that lurked behind these words. A minor postpartum complication had gotten things off to a rocky start, as Clarence needed 2 formula feeds while Jada underwent a procedure. He then latched well, but at their follow-up visit when he was 5 days old, he had lost more weight than the lactation nurse felt comfortable with. She advised Jada to pump between feeds and give Clarence a bottle of breast milk. The morning's panic resulted from Clarence now not even seeking out the breast at all, and a pumping session that produced less milk than expected. For Jada, the full impact of accumulated feelings of failure from her pre-baby life came bearing down on her with a crushing weight. Can you switch the angle of the camera so I can see Clarence better? I asked. After that slightly dizzying movement of the image, a sleeping infant appeared on the screen. Not the middle of the night screaming banshee they had first described, he now lay nestled on Jada's chest, his left hand curled against her face. I took some time to describe in detail what I saw, the gentle rise and fall of his breath, the robust cheeks, the relaxed posture of his arm. I noted how perfectly he nestled his little body against his mother. And now in the book, I go into some didactic about the power of infant observation, which of course is what brings us all together in the Brazelton Institute. But now what I'll do is I'll go back to read sort of the conclusion of that little story. Our focus on Clarence confirmed the value of listening to the baby's communication. When Jada switched the camera back to a view of herself and Darius, I saw how the brief period of observation had helped to shift the parents out of their agitated state. Jada now said how the skin-to-skin contact helped to calm her, relieving the pressure to get him to nurse. After a moment of quiet, they again moved the camera so I could see Clarence sleeping on his mother. But rather than change the view, we watched Clarence's efforts to shift himself out of deep sleep. First, he opened his arms stretched over his head, then he extended his legs. His gaze landed briefly on Jada's face before the effort seemed too much. By now, we were all captivated by his deliberate movements. We were rewarded when both eyes opened together. As time slowed and we all carefully observed, we saw him open his mouth, turn his head, and reach his lips towards Jada's breast. He's rooting, she exclaimed joyfully. Clarence told his parents, not with words, but with behavior, what they longed to discover. I'm not done with nursing. When I wanted to reassure them that breastfeeding would be fine, the truth was that I didn't know. I simply opened up a space in which they could tolerate the uncertainty. Freed from the pressure to fix the problem and released from debilitating feelings of self-doubt, they could be fully open to listen to their son's subtle communication. Several days later, they joyfully reported settling into a nice rhythm of breastfeeding, pumping, and bottle feeding. Clarence, Jada, and Darius all learned that they could survive a difficult moment and reconnect. So that I know that's a fairly long story, but what I wanted to do was really give you a flavor of what these concepts that I'm going to talk about look like in a moment of clinical encounter. So this book that Inga referred to at the beginning, I really wrote because I wanted to synthesize everything that I had learned over the last 30 years with the privilege of being on the front lines with families in this practice while being immersed in contemporary developmental science in the fellowship, and also going on my own journey of healing relationships. So the book is really not a what to do book, although many people tried to get me to publish a what to do book in the publishing world, but really a how to be book. And it's rooted in evidence from contemporary developmental science, which is then illustrated through these detailed clinical cases. And I love the fact that we have such a broad audience, people from many different fields, because my hope was that it would be relevant for anyone working on the front lines with infants and caregivers, including pediatricians, home visitors, nurses, mental health professionals, early childhood educators, doulas, many others that are represented on this call today. So the book is organized around this concept of listening in. Now, we all talk about listening, and I think everyone here recognizes the tremendous value of making yourself available to fully listen. But what is that? And so listening in, I describe as a particular way of listening, which is that we suspend expectation and are open to surprise. And this is where the not knowing comes in. We replace certainty with a humble not knowing. And we are willing to make mistakes, to feel awkward and uneasy as we find our way into another person's experience. So for me, this was kind of, I mean, many people have different training than as a physician. I feel like in some ways I'm a little bit limited in my training as a physician, where I was taught to see my role as to inform and advise and educate. But as a colleague of mine who's also a pediatrician said, it simply wasn't working. And so I had to learn something new because it was very frustrating to be the person who knew supposedly in this practice was the expert on behavioral pediatrics. And it was not, I wasn't able to help people. This is where what I realized was that when I actually let go of the need to know what to do, that was when really transformations occurred in my interactions. And so what the way I understand this is we have, we talk about unconscious bias, implicit bias. We have ideas in our minds about people that are out of our awareness. So when we lean in an intentional way into not knowing, it helps us to overcome hidden assumptions, which allows for a more authentic connection. And a huge influence on me is the psychoanalyst Bion, who used the term without memory or desire. So you bring yourself into the space with no particular expectation. And a colleague of mine made this graphic, which I think just so beautifully represents what I am trying to convey with this idea of the not knowing stance. And another term I use is playing in the uncertainty, because I think we're all very good at play and we understand the intrinsic value of being playful. But playing is by nature uncertain. And so this is, as I said, my experience of not knowing was what opened the door to a family story. So I call it our superpower. So when you wrote, will I be enough? I think this is how you can come into an encounter with a sense of confidence. If you engage your not knowing stance and are comfortable with being uncomfortable, you will be enough. So how do I know this? Like, who am I to say this? And I think a lot of it comes from the fact that, like many of you, my work is immersed in being with infants and caregivers when they meet each other. And you just, by virtue of being in that space, gives you a kind of bodily knowledge of this process, which really, this is the prototype. When a baby is born, wherever in the world they're born and whatever culture they are a product of, they, as a being human, they have a mind that is enclosed in their body that is different from their caregiver. And this is actually my granddaughter at just a few hours old, meeting her parent, whose voice is very familiar to her. And she, if you could give words to her expression, she might say, "Now, who exactly are you?" Such a complex expression of a newborn baby. So as we, in the world of Brazelton, know that babies have tremendous capacity to communicate purpose and intention, and they have unique ways of moving and responding to their environment. But we also know that their cues can be subtle and that caregivers frequently miss their signals. And this is really a critically important part of this idea of the not knowing stance. Because, and I'm going to go into this in more detail when I delve into some of the scientific evidence, the good news is that these missed signals are actually at the root of healthy development, because as the baby and the caregiver work to find each other, the caregiver gets an increased sense of confidence, and the baby gets an increased sense of their own coherence as a separate person. So that is something that you really could see in the story I read you at the beginning, that how, the baby was able to say, "Hey, I may only be 5 days old, but I'm going to tell you what I need." And the parents together as a couple went from feeling just like they're falling apart to this sense of wholeness and confidence. And that happens as you allow this kind of messy, uncertain process to unfold. So we're talking, I should say, explicitly about parallel process. There's the process of the caregiver and the infant getting to know each other, and then there's the process of us as the practitioner getting to know the baby and the family together. And so this is not in the book. And now I'm going to have to write another book, because in work with some of my colleagues in Scotland, who were very much influenced by the work of Colwyn Trevarthen, I began to think a lot about the musicality of infant caregiver interaction and the musicality of our clinical interaction. And my husband happens to be a jazz musician. So just like he's been immersed in infant parent mental health, I've been immersed in jazz just by virtue of living with him. So this, I found this to be a very helpful metaphor, because it's not true that we don't know anything. Our mind is not blank. So in an improvisational jazz session, the people who are playing have studied and studied and studied and have tremendous knowledge of jazz. But in the moment of improv, they are simply present to listen to each other. And I think this is a very good metaphor for what happens when we listen in a clinical encounter. And I also think it's complicated, because in a jazz, there are lots of different instruments. And so in a clinical encounter with a family, unlike individual psychotherapy, we're listening to many different voices. We're listening to the infant's voice, we're listening to the caregiver, we're listening to the relationship as its own distinct entity, all within the context of the various cultures that the family is embedded. So I borrowed this quote and changed it a bit from Charlie Parker, So we have all this knowledge, and then in the moment, we learn it all, and then we put it aside and just play. He had some other words that I will not mention here to describe that, but I think that it's an apt metaphor. And I'm curious to hear what people think when we get to the discussion. Okay, but the bottom line is my dear friend and mentor, Ed Tronick, says, it's complicated. Okay, so I'm going to segue in a little bit about the NBO here so that I can root what I'm saying to you in the context of the NBO. So this is probably something familiar to certainly those of you who've done the NBO training. What is the NBO? I borrowed this slide from the US training. An interactive tool designed to strengthen the relationship between infants and parents, beginning in the newborn period through the first 3 months of life. Okay, so we all, or those of us who have been trained and probably others, know that there are 18 observational items that anchor the NBO. And this is what I have come to call the NBO paradox. So I want to link this idea of the not knowing stance with the NBO. And because, as my dear friend and colleague, also Kevin Nugent, says, even though we're trained in how to perform the items, anything is an NBO, even if the baby cries or sleeps the whole time. So how do we kind of wrap our minds around this paradox? And I think sort of the not knowing stance is the answer. Because what the NBO does is it intentionally brings the baby's voice into the music of the interaction. Because there are plenty of trainings, ways of being, I'm very involved in also the FAN training here in the United States that don't bring in the baby's voice. And as we all know, you have to have the baby's voice. And that to me is the value of the NBO. But we also all know that we're really listening to all those perspectives simultaneously. And this is where the jazz metaphor comes in. And what we do without naming it is we let families lead us to discover what they need in the moment. So what I'm going to do now is just to touch on what I mean by these 4 perspectives. So this is complicated because we're really holding all of this in our minds at once while we're with a family. And my hope is that by naming it and making it more explicit, it will help in that process of leaving your mind, as someone said, blank, but not blank. Okay, so here we go. I'm going to just show you a little bit of an NBO of me doing it with a 3-day-old in the home. I mean, this is something you're all familiar with, but I think it's always helpful to look at an actual baby communication. So I'm just going to play it here for you.
He's so awake, we call the orienting items, and sort of how he listens to your voice. And I just see looking at him, he's just incredibly alert and engaged in wide awake. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to hold him and have him talk to him.
Ruben, hi baby boy. Hi. Oh yeah, you can hear me? Yes. Do you recognize my voice? Do you recognize my voice? I'm your Ima. I'm your Ima.
Okay, so now I'm going to do, because I'm going to just turn him.
And baby boy. Baby boy. Yeah. Yeah. You recognize my voice? Yeah. Hi. Hi. I'm your Ima. Yes. 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 Yeah. How you doing? Are you a happy boy? Are you a happy boy?
So really so attentive to that very familiar voice that you listen to.
Yeah.
And let's see, okay, what you do looking at just a face. Now I know I'm not nearly as interesting as your mom. But let's see what you do with your face and voice. You're making a whoopee while I'm
Yeah.
talking to you. Yes, you're multitasking.
That's very good.
Hi,
So, of course, so magical. This is the magic of the NBO, because the baby's voice is so compelling. And thanks to dear Barry Brazelton and the Neonatal Behavioral Assessment Scale, which preceded the NBO, we have these very detailed way of listening for the infant's contribution. And this is something I'm not going to go into a lot, because this is an area that most of the people on this call are probably quite familiar with. When I speak with audiences who are not attending a Brazelton Institute event, I go into this in a little bit more detail. As to what are the things that we look at that make a baby uniquely that baby. So sensory processing, state regulation are two, in my experience, very important qualities that help us distinguish what the baby is bringing to the relationship. Okay, but then, we talk about listening to caregivers. I think in my experience as an NBO trainer, we don't as explicitly talk about how do we listen to the caregiver. And so I'm going to take a little bit of a dive into the science behind what is happening when we're listening to the caregiver. And after that, I'm going to actually argue that the relationship is something distinct from either the infant or the caregiver. So we're listening to the infant, we're listening to the caregiver, and we're listening and observing to how each affects the other in the moment. So this is really, again, I think very analogous to improvisational jazz. It's complicated. Okay, so the three things I'm going to touch on are how we create safety in terms of the neurobiology of our encounter with a family, how we promote what in the US, I'm not sure you do, other trainings around the world have used the parent amour frame, where we do explicitly bring in the idea of mentalization. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about what I also have come to recognize through my clinical experience as being really, really important in listening to caregivers, which is listening for loss. So I'm just going to touch on each of these a bit before moving on to the relationship. And I think whenever we talk about relationships, we come up against this really tough issue of blame. That especially in Western cultures, the parenting has a kind of competitive edge. It's like something you do to your child. And then at the same time, in many cultures around the world, especially in the United States, probably worse. I mean, I don't know. It's bad in a lot of places, but certainly not good in the United States, that parents are left with insufficient support. And these things together can create a vulnerability that as soon as you start talking about the relationship as being important, parents do immediately go into a place of feeling blamed. So what do we do about that? This is where the superpower of the not knowing stance, because we intentionally free the space of judgment and blame, and that allows families to open the door to their story and allow us in. When we're intentionally putting aside this idea of blame. And it's, the very destructive cousin of blame is shame. And this, I think, is extremely prevalent in the work. You heard it in the story of Jada, where whatever shame that comes from, a whole 30 years of living prior to becoming a mom, when the baby is apparently not doing well with breastfeeding, all of that comes rushing in. And so this sense of shame is right there under the surface. And when a person feels shame, which is worse, than blame, then what happens is there's a physiologic response to shut down. So here in my work, and I'm going to give you just a sampler of it, I've been very influenced by the work of Steve Porges, the neuroscientist who said the feeling of safety is the treatment. So again, looking at the moment of encounter, the way we bring in the voice of the caregiver is to create an environment of safety. So how do we do that? So a little primer on how our bodies in an unconscious way make meaning of an environment as safe or not safe. So many of us have heard about the sympathetic and the parasympathetic system. So when we are calm and we can engage with another person, we are under the influence of what Porges called the smart vagus. So a branch of the vagal nerve that allows us to receive a hug, to look into each other's eyes. And if we become in a situation of danger, something that's also very familiar to people is the fight-flight system, the adrenaline to either attack or run away. But there's actually a third option, and this is very much at play in our clinical work, which is that when we experience this in a situation as threatening, in psychology, it's called we dissociate. So then the primitive vagus is running the show. And this is often the case in a clinical encounter where parents are worried about that they're not doing a good job, that there's something wrong. And I have to say, this is so difficult when we're teaching the NBO, because we want to convey the idea that it's not an assessment, but in the parent's mind, anything you do with their baby is an assessment of them. So this is a hard thing to come up against and really requires us to really intentionally address it. So the way we physically are in the room, the way we use our voice, the way we use our body, the way we have a protected time, the comfort of the space if possible, even if it's in a hospital room, those are critically important to engage the smart vagus and to help a family come out of that state of threat, which you can't see that, but you know that from what I've just talked about and how we know how much guilt, shame, and blame just sort of comes with the process of being a new parent, that likely often they are in that state. So Porges talks about the clinical encounter as a neural exercise. Now, doing the NBO, we don't encounter a caregiver armed with a list of questions, but as physicians, we certainly do. And what happens if we do that is we unintentionally perpetuate the sense of threat. So when we move into that not knowing stance, put aside our questions, what we're doing actually is affecting the physiology of the caregiver by allowing the smart vagus to come online. And I don't know about for you, but for me, this knowledge, talk about not having a blank slate, is really, really important. For me to know the physiology helps me to engage the not knowing stance. And then another body of research and knowledge that I also find incredibly helpful to hold in my mind in the clinical moment is this idea of mentalization, which probably many of you are familiar with, but it's quite, again, a complex concept, critically important, that grew out of attachment research. And the way I think of mentalization, and actually when I first learned about this totally transformed my practice. I went from thinking that I was supposed to tell people what to do to understanding that my role was really to help to shift parents to a state where they could be curious and wonder about the meaning of their child's behavior. So what is it? It's a uniquely human ability to attribute motivation and intention to others' behavior. And it's a shift in the caregiver from I know or I need to know to I wonder. And I think I've had these discussions with people about the use of the word curiosity versus the idea of the not knowing stance. And they're very similar, but what the difference is that you're okay with not knowing. Like, I don't have to know what to do in this moment. Like, again, thinking back to Jada and Clarence and Darius, that they became able to be curious about what was the perspective of the baby, rather than what do I need to do to get the baby to nurse. And so this is also, in addition to creating safety, what we're doing in our interaction with the caregiver is creating a space for them to what is called holding their child's mind in mind. And this is actually my first book I wrote, because this was such a mind-blowing experience for me to learn this, that I had to write a book about it. That's how I became a writer 15 years ago. But I want to read you one more vignette. Let's see, how am I doing? I think I'm doing okay with time. I have till about, I was trying to stop a half hour ahead of the end, which is, so that would be 8 o'clock my time. So,
yes, there is an hour and 5 minutes still.
Great. So I'm going to just read you another vignette from the book, because I think that it shows that infant observation actually is a way to engage a caregiver's reflective capacities. All right. Ingrid was certain that 5-week-old Jack's stiff movements were due to her methadone use during pregnancy. She blamed herself, even though she acknowledged Jack did not show signs of withdrawal and had not required medication after birth. I suggested we take time to observe him and see what we might learn. She gently unwrapped the baby and laid him down on the floor. His arms and legs immediately extended, seeming to confirm his mother's observation of his stiffness. But I still wasn't sure. I held back from indulging my worry that her fears would be confirmed. Ingrid began to speak gently to Jack from the side. As she did so, he extended his arms and legs again before turning his whole body towards her. Now we could reframe the stiffness as a communication. He then moved his arms in an intentional way, as if to reach for her. As I pointed out his deliberate movements to Ingrid, she swooped him up, nestled him in her arms. Once she could see the purpose in his movements, she knew they were not a problem, but a strength, an expression of his connection to her. So there we see her shift from a non-mentalizing, non-reflective space. I am certain that my methadone made him a stiff baby, to I don't know. And in the calm space, then, oh, this is a different meaning. His movement has a different meaning from the meaning that I gave him. So this is a quote from the book. Observation of the infant offers a path to engage the caregiver's reflective capacities. Okay, so now I'm going to spend a little time talking about loss, because I feel like sometimes this is an underappreciated. We talk a lot about trauma-informed care. I think the language of loss is more helpful, because it points to what can happen that's healing. I remember this watching an NBO, actually we use in trainings here in the US, where there were 2 pictures on the bedside of 2 babies while the person was doing the NBO, and just went in and kind of went through the items. And at the end, at the very end, the baby was very fussy. It was kind of one of these experiences where you get very anxious doing the NBO. Well, anyway, the parents shared the story that they had twins who were stillborn. And, you know, so there you see that this is a very important part of the story. So when there is loss that's unexpressed and unprocessed, not that you ever get over that, but you at least give voice to it and make it part of your narrative. But if you shut it out and you don't talk about it, it can get in the way of the reflective capacities. So linking this back to this idea of listening in, and this happens to me again and again and again. And I talk about this willingness to be surprised, that I go in really intentionally not knowing where we're headed, and 30 minutes into an hour visit, the tears are coming. And and they just erupt, to surprising both, the caregiver, the parents, and me when that happens. So I came to understand that the most important item in my office was a box of tissues, because I didn't want to have to interrupt this, and I didn't want to have to reach for something, to hand them something. I wanted them to have it there if they wanted it, so that I could feel free to open this up in case things did get messy. And then these moments were often the most powerfully transformative moments in a clinical interaction. And a colleague posted this in a beautiful blog post. If you follow me on LinkedIn, you can find it, because I reposted it, which I think just captures the connection between the not knowing stance and the role of mourning. Were it possible for us to see further than our knowledge reaches, and yet a little way beyond the outworks of our divining, perhaps we would endure our sadnesses with greater confidence than our joys, for they are the moments when something new has entered into us, something unknown. Okay, so moving along, what I've done is to call our attention to the voice of the baby, the voice of the caregiver, and now I'm going to focus on how the relationship, we talk about the NBO as a relationship building tool, but what are we really doing to build relationships? So we are actually looking at the way the infant and the caregiver change each other in moment by moment microscopic interactive process, well before the capacity for language and thought develop. And so, and my dear colleague, Lisa Johnson here in the US, when she was doing the fellowship, she said the baby is an ally. So it's not just that we're listening to the baby's voice. What we are facilitating in the NBO is an actual moment where a caregiver has an experience of self-efficacy in relation to their baby in real time. So something actually happens with us as a presence of a containing environment where the baby and the caregiver change each other. And these are the moments that protect against postpartum depression and anxiety by promoting parental self-efficacy. So this is sort of is a similar idea to that quote I read about grieving. And this is also from the book. More than simply offering emotional support, when we bring in the baby's actual voice, we gain access to the energy of the interaction, which can fuel growth and change for infant and caregiver alike. Okay, so that's a lot of that you see in that story that I spent a lot of time reading at the beginning. And somebody mentioned in the chat the power of discord. So I'm going to take a little bit of a deeper dive into the work of Dr. Tronick here. And I wrote this book with him, which was itself a kind of messy process of mismatch and repair. And what we kind of, this essence of the power of discord is this repair theory of human development. And, Winnicott spoke of the idea of the good enough mother, and the idea that it's actually when things go wrong, that it's not just that it's okay to make mistakes, but when things go wrong, that's when meaningful change happens. So things have to go wrong, not just that it's okay that they go wrong. And Ed's research really validates Winnicott's clinical observation of the concept of the good enough mother, which is that healthy relationships are not characterized by perfect attunement, but actually a messy process of mismatch and repair. And that this process builds resilience and trust and the capacity for self-regulation and intimacy grow from these moment-to-moment interactions. And these experiences change our brain and body and organize the way we function in new relationships throughout our lives. And I have to say, in this presentation, I'm not going to go into the neuroscience. There's only so much I can do in an hour, and I don't want to overwhelm you. But a lot of it is actually in the book. Probably many of you are familiar with the still face paradigm, but I always find it helpful to show it. So I'm just going to, for those of you who are not familiar with it, because I think it really, the power of it is it takes us inside the relationship. So just a little bit of background. When Dr. Tronick developed this experiment back in the early 70s, it was thought that really the baby was a totally passive participant, not like that they didn't have any role to play other than responding to the caregiver. And when he went on rounds with Dr. Brazelton, he found that that was absolutely false. And so he set up an experiment to prove that actually the baby was an active player in the relationship right from the beginning. And so sometimes this can be a little upsetting to watch, but I've come to understand it as a very hopeful process, which I'll explain to you after I show you the video, but you just have to take my word for it, even though sometimes it can be a little bit upsetting. The idea was that the parent and the infant interact, and then the parent kind of removes themselves from the interaction by not moving their face. And then you see what the baby does. And then, so I'm going to show you just a very brief example, and then we'll talk about what it means.
Hi, sweetheart. Yes, you're doing super. Sleepy kid was the sleepy kid done, and this sleepy kid went. Woo! There you go. Yes. What a good girl. The wheels on the bus go round and round, round and round, round and round.
Okay. So, yeah, I think when people, I remember when I first saw this, I was like, how did they ever get this by the IRB, the board that reviews research? It felt very cruel. And I think when people see it, they respond to the baby's loss, the mother's loss. But what you see is that this baby who is maybe 5 months old, no language to speak of, no thought in the way that we think of language associated with thought, but they have this ability, the baby right away just starts to say, hey, look at me, let's look at this together. I mean, her whole body just exudes the sense of confidence that she knows what to do to get her mother's attention back. And so she must have had this experience before. So what it tells us is this is life. It's just kind of slowed down for the experiment, that the baby has had moments, microscopic and bigger moments, where the mother is not engaged with her. And yet the mother comes back. And so she has this hopefulness in her body. And I will say, I'm not going to show the video, but when you look at the videos of babies with depressed moms where they haven't had this experience, that is, the baby does not show this kind of robust sense of hope. So this is kind of evidence that this mismatch and repair process is an essential part of healthy development. And there's been now decades and decades of replicated research showing that actually in a healthy, typical relationship, interactions are mismatched 70% of the time. And as long as the majority of those are repaired, then development proceeds in a healthy way. So what is the power of repair? I mean, this is where you can kind of draw on your own life experience, that when you go through a difficult moment with someone you love and then you reconnect, it gives you this feeling of pleasure, trust, and security, and teaches this critical life lesson that when things are difficult, as they inevitably are in life, you can get to a better place. And this builds a core sense of agency and hope. So I brought in the idea of the good enough caregiver. I talked about the good enough mother, but that's, Winnicott wrote when primary caregivers were mostly mothers. And we have caregivers today burdened by this expectation of perfection. But as I've been saying, its growth happens through the mistakes. Okay, so what I've done in sort of record time is review these 4 core principles of early relational health: the power of infant observation, the healing power of safety, the role of facilitating mentalization and reflective functioning, and the repair theory of human development. So what I was going to do now, wow, I feel like I still have time. I have a 4-minute video, which I'm going to show you, because I am coming to sort of the end of the content of the talk. So which illustrates in an interaction. So this is not an NBO, but it is an interaction with a family that employs these different perspectives and research concepts. So I teach a class as part of the Hello It's Me project, and actually I did a lot of this during the pandemic, where I have a family come in for an interview, and I call it the interview of good enough because they're not a patient. I often would get them from my lactation consultant colleagues. It's just a typical family, and they come on the screen, and I have about 15 or so students who come from a variety of disciplines who are sort of in the circle around the screen. And I say our aim here is simply to get to know you and your baby, and it lasts maybe 20 minutes. And one of my students made a 4-minute condensed version. And so I'm just going to show that to you because I think you will see many of the principles of these perspectives, at least the 3 perspectives. The 4th kind of is not mentioned, but I think it will be obvious to you when I show you the video. And here we go.
Molly, it's my wife, Emma. We have Elliot, who's 10 weeks, and then also Oliver is our older son. He's 7, and so he's at 1st grade right now. Elliot was conceived using IUI, so it took us several cycles and sort of quite the process. We used donor sperm from a sperm bank. I carried both babies.
Well, I see, like you said, he seems to be sort of between asleep and awake.
Yes, we're in those stages where he's that stage where he's just sort of daytime naps or a little touch and go for us right now. So
yeah, we see that so clearly. He's not quite sure whether he wants to be awake or asleep. So he gets disorganized though, pretty easily, it sounds like.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. And has it always been like that, or is that something you've noticed over time?
I'd say that started around 6 weeks or so. Yeah, I think prior to that, he was pretty much passed out, but right around 6 weeks.
It almost seems as if, as you know, with the rhythm of your voices, I mean, I may be imagining this, but this is what I think I see is, that does he feel to you like he's settling into a deeper sleep?
Yes, he definitely does better with voices. I don't know if you can hear too, we have rain sounds in the background. That's pretty much a staple in our house at this point, is just to keep him. He seems to do very well with water sounds.
So the rain, that you keep the rain on, and that keeps him, what does the rain sound do for him to have it in your house?
It seems to keep him sort of, at like I don't know if we would say like an emotional plateau. It does seem to help if we put him near it in terms of keeping things from getting too rambunctious. I would say he's easily overwhelmed. He'll have a few minutes of very intense happiness, lots of smiles. But I would say 4 or 5 minutes of loud noise or a lot of interaction can start to get him a little bit overwhelmed.
wondering if, again, what I'm seeing is that this experience of being held by you and hearing your voices together for a baby who tends to somewhat easily be disorganized in a way that sounds to me, sort of reading through the lines, sometimes he can be not that easy a baby to take care of. But that you two have found all these wonderful ways, you know, as his parents together in helping him to feel so relaxed and at ease.
We try.
Yes. Yes. There's a lot of trial and error.
Yeah. Yeah. Is there anything you want to tell the class?
I think particularly for moms, and maybe even a little bit extra for a mom who's delivered and breastfeeding, I think there's just an enormous amount of pressure on minimizing how challenging things are. And I was so guilty of that with Oliver. He never slept ever. And I remember being so exhausted, and we had a really hard time sleep training him. And, you know, and anytime anybody would ask, I always felt this immense pressure to be like, oh no, he's such a great baby. He's so easy. And I think one of the things that's really hard is being able to say as a mom that things are hard with your baby, because you don't want to make your baby sound like, you know, like they're a problem. And so I'm trying really hard this time with Elliot to be a little bit more honest about it is hard. You know, sometimes he just cries and there's nothing we can do about it. And but I think that guilt is something that if I had to pass something along to watch for in moms. Holly.
Okay, so I'm going to actually improvise here a little bit, because I'm going to go on to the big picture of culture, and I only have a few more slides, but instead of doing that, I'm going to go back to this slide, and I'm going to take maybe 5-10 minutes for us to have a discussion of this video. And because I've given you a lot of ideas in the last 45 minutes or so. Is that all right with you, Inga, that we just have a little bit of a Q&A period?
Yes, absolutely.
So maybe, I don't know if people want to rate, I'll let you tech people figure out how to get questions. I don't know if people want to put them in the chat or raise their actual hand, virtual hand, but I want to hear sort of if people have questions about this, what they see in the video regarding these 4 principles and these 4 perspectives that I've been talking about.
Yeah. Should we try with putting a hand up? Anybody got any questions or comments? Wonder if you've stunned everybody into silence.
I hope not. I mean, it's fine with me. I know it takes time to kind of process things and then relax into the Q&A part typically. So I'm also happy to just keep going if that seems like the better course now, and then we can have the full half hour to open up for discussion. Does that seem like a better plan right now?
Let's do that, and then in the meantime,
well, I just wanted to check in. Great. So I'm going to keep going then.
Holly.
Okay. So as I said, we're doing this, listening in a jazz improv, and I guess, I haven't quite gotten the analogy perfect, because who are we? We're the audience, I guess, in a way, listening to all of these different voices. We're also, in a sense, the conductor, in that we pay attention to which voices are going to come forward and which voices matter at this moment. So I'm still working on the analogy. Anyone who wants to help me with it, I'm happy to hear that. So culture is a very broad term. I'm just going to talk about, and cultural humility and the not knowing stance are very closely linked. And the term cultural humility, at least in the healthcare world, offers an alternative to this, what I think of as a very problematic term, cultural competence, which implies that we can learn about a particular culture, and then we could know something about an individual who identifies as belonging to that culture. Because that implies that we're able to be certain about who another person is. And the fact is that even if 10 people identify as belonging to a particular culture, each of them is different from the other. So the cultural humility embraces, in the place of certainty, this humbleness of not knowing. So cultural humility and early relational health are actually united by this core concept of the not knowing stance, and baby and caregiver are as separate people getting to know each other in a messy, culturally embedded process over time. And this is a core principle of the NBO. This is another slide that I took from the actual NBO training. So you see, we are very much in sync in our thinking here. But I opened up the idea of culture to quite broadly, and not talking about a culture of, a place, and of identities, but very broad ideas of culture. And in the book, I talk about the culture of historical trauma, the culture of parental care, and the culture of early relational care. And these are things that are existing, that the family exists in this larger milieu. And it might not be something that you actually talk about in any particular interaction, but it is important to name these things and know that they are there. And I was thinking this morning of an example. So I'm going to talk about this first. So I live in a community in rural Western Massachusetts, where we have the very painful experience of people who are doing landscaping, who have come from other countries, literally being taken away in the act of doing their work and disappearing. And I work in a clinic where these are our patients. So I work in a clinic where we take care of primarily uninsured families, which is largely undocumented immigrants. So if I'm working with a parent and a baby, the most pressing issue to that family might be that they lost a baby it had a previous pregnancy loss. But it might also be that ICE is in our community and that they're terrified that this is going to happen to them. So I don't know, when I go in with a family, which of these or what issues are most pressing in their life, but I did feel that it's important to name that there are much larger issues that are at play simultaneously with the more microscopic issues within the individual family. And these are just an example of some of the things that I refer to that are going on in the larger social system of families. And then there's the culture of parental care, which I've mentioned. This great quote from John Bowlby: "If a community values its children, it must cherish their parents." So when we talk about, how parents are with their babies, it's really, really important to hold in our mind, like the mom in that video said, there's tremendous pressure that everything has to be fine. And there is very little holding of parents. And that is problematic. Okay, and then in terms of the culture of early relational care, what I mean by bringing that in is that all of us, you, need to be valued. We are, when I talk about early relational health, there's the primary caregiving relationships, but all the relationships in the that form the milieu of a young child's life have potential to influence their healthy development. So the workforce, which is all of you, needs to be supported in their role in promoting the health and well-being of the next generation. And this involves a lot of things. It involves paying people well, lots of things that are not happening, job security. But one thing that I just like to tease out is this idea of reflective practice, which I hope people are able to engage in, because this is very intense work and somebody needs to be holding the caregiver. I don't mean the parent, but the caregiver who's the practitioner. So I've taken you on this very big journey where we've gone from the focus on the baby to focus on the caregiver to thinking about the relationship as its own distinct entity and then embedded in the larger social and cultural context. And for the last couple of slides, I'm going to shift our view back to the higher magnification, because the wonder of the baby, why is this different from any other field? Whether we're in perinatal mental health or nursing or neonatology, is that there is a baby. And the baby brings us fully into the present moment. And I'll just read another little tiny story. This is actually from The Power of Discord. Lily's tiny body wriggled inside and out. This is looking at the perspective of the experience from the baby and then from the mother. She screamed again and again as her arms flew over her head. Something was in her mouth, but her body felt too confused to know what to do with it. Then she heard a soft, gentle whisper and felt wrapped in a warm blanket. Her breathing slowed. She could rest her arms on her chest and stop her wild movements. Her body relaxed as her need for help settling her immature nervous system was understood, and soon she drifted off to sleep. After a brief nap, her body felt organized and restored with energy. When Michelle again put her to the breast, she latched on without struggle. And then this is Michelle's perspective. Mom had anticipated Lily's arrival with excitement and fear. This was her first baby. She wondered how she would know what to do. She tried to put her screaming infant to her breast, but Lily's arms got in the way and her movements became increasingly disorganized. Then Michelle began to speak softly to Lily while wrapping her tightly, and soon she felt Lily's body go from tense to relaxed as the incessant crying slowed and finally stopped. When Lily slept and then woke and vigorously latched onto nurse, Michelle experienced a peaceful calm that till then had eluded her. She thought, I know you. In this early moment of figuring things out together, Lily and Michelle began to fall in love. So that describes a moment of meeting, which is a concept that was originally described by infant researcher Lou Sander. Now, the thing that people often misunderstand about this is it's not just a nice moment. It's a moment that occurs after a difficult moment. Because that is how the change happens. And so what I've tried to convey in this hour is that no matter how messy the situation we come into, if we have a singular focus on facilitating a moment of connection in that visit, you had asked about, oh, there's all sorts of other things to do, but you can do this if you give, 10 minutes of your full presence to this. You can create one of those moments, and one moment of meeting can produce extraordinary change, shifting the narrative from anger and disconnection to possibility for healing and growth. So I loved Sarah came up with this title for the talk, which I so love, making every contact with babies and caregivers count. When we open ourselves to not knowing, each interaction has potential for producing transformative energy and creating a renewed sense of hope. So if you want to learn more, and I can send you the PowerPoint if people are interested, there's this. And then I'll just go back to this. I think actually I'd rather see everybody for the, now we have a whole half hour, which is great. Should I leave the questions up or should I stop sharing?
That's up to you, Claudia.
Does somebody have the ability to put these in the chat? I'm not good at that. So that people can look at them.
Ask my little tech team whether that's a possibility. Would you like to ask one question at the time, or?
Well, we already did the first. Oh no, we did. I took out the first one. Okay. Well, I just want to. I don't want to. I want people to be able to say whatever strikes them to talk about. But these are sort of organizing questions. that I'll read them. And then if people feel like answering them, great. And if people have other things they want to say, or if people have the other thing we had talked about is if some clinical situation comes to mind, that as long as you do it in a way that preserves confidentiality, you could bring that up. But anyway, I'll read these and then I will stop sharing. So think of a time when something unexpected was revealed in an interaction. How did that happen and how did it affect the work? And then this question about the blank slate. How does what we know, that is the scientific evidence and our clinical experience, inform how we are in moment by moment engagement with families? And then last, which I didn't ask at the beginning because I hadn't taught you about it yet, what is hard about the stance of not knowing? And what can help us to listen in? All right, so I'm going to stop sharing now so I can hopefully see people. And I know we're pretty, yeah. So
Okay, there are 2 questions. Teresa, do you want to pop on your camera? And there we go.
Hi, thank you. Thank you so much for a really wonderful presentation. And just going back to the video that you showed of yourself doing the NBO, what struck me was how calmly and gently you introduced the concept of them having a difficult time. So something sort of negative. You didn't feel what I might have felt was a pressure to reassure, look how calm he is, look how well you're doing, all of that. You were able to very gently allow the negative, which is presumably what they were coming for, into the space, but not in I just thought I was very impressed by that. So yeah, and I just wanted to say how much everything you say it's beautifully put together and resonates so well. Thank you so much.
well, thank you. You know, I think what's interesting is that we do talk a lot about, first of all, I will say there was nothing wrong. So I want to clarify that they weren't coming with any problem. And so that's what's interesting about the interview is that it's really hard for everyone, you know, because being a new parent is hard. I mean, if it isn't, then you're missing something. So I just wanted to clarify that it was not a patient and there was not a problem. But I also think that we talk a lot about being strength-based, which is great. And I'm all for being strength-based. But I do think you identify that there is a risk of that, because if a person actually is struggling and it's hard, you feel a need to comfort them. You know, it comes from a good place. Yes, you're doing a great job, but really they want you to see that it is hard. Like she says it, I love that. The thing I love about that video is that eventually she comes around to saying what's really on her mind in such a authentic, powerful way.
Are there any other questions, comments? Feel free to unmute as well. If you can't find the hand button, it can be a little bit tricky. Do feel free to just unmute. Feel free to ask or comment. I'll bring some examples.
Hi, it's Lisa calling from West Yorkshire. I just feel just to say that I think what's really good about this, and this is what I'm trying to get across to the health visitors that I work with, I think they see the EMBO as this humongous thing that they have to do, and I'm trying to get across that it's about changing the mindset, that it's a conversation, it's the way you bring the baby into it, and you don't have to do all 18. 18, I can't remember what, my word's gone out of my head, but they don't have to complete the full observation from start to finish. I did a visit and we just talked about the baby following the ball. And the mum was, you'd thought I'd given her £1 million. She was like astounded and, you know, found it amazing that the baby could see this ball to follow it, you know, and it was quite empowering. So I think these little bits of these conversations and case studies show that, don't they, that it's the little things that mean the most to the parents. And I think sometimes people forget that.
Yeah, and I think what's hard is that in order to be a good observer of babies, it is useful to learn the 18 items and then to practice them. But I think that you need to realize that you're practicing them. And so if you see a family and you have to learn them, and you might be working with a family that's quite vulnerable. So recognizing that there is this learning process. I actually don't know how to address this. I think it's a bit of a dilemma with the NBO training because you do need to learn how to do infant observation. But then when you're in the clinical moment, being able to follow and again, I'm using my jazz metaphor, but I think you're sort of the conductor. Which voices are needing to come forth at this moment in our interaction? And how am I using the infant observation to do that? And that means kind of letting go of the structure of it in the moment and just playing. And then maybe find, like you said, that one thing addresses whatever is most relevant and meaningful to that family at that moment.
Yeah, that's exactly it. They need to know them so that they can recognize what they're looking for and when to bring it out. So yeah, no, that's really good. Thank you.
There are things in the chat, but I'm not good at doing that. So I don't know if one of the tech people can look at the chat and read the questions if they come in the chat.
Yeah, I was just wondering, there's a couple of comments. Mercy, would you like to say something or? Oh, I can't hear you.
Hi,
Hi,
can you hear me?
we can hear you.
All right. I was saying I came in a bit late, but question one was interesting. I would like to hear maybe from other people's experiences when something unexpected happens during your time with the family. How do you, I don't have the question in my face, but I think it's along those lines to say, how would you handle that?
Yeah, the question is when something unexpected arises and how did it affect the work?
Okay.
So that, and I also want to be clear that that's kind of what we're aiming for. Not that that's not a problem, but how does it work? What does it look like in the visit? If people can think of examples of that.
Thank you. And if anybody has got any comment to that,
I mean,
please.
I'm happy to give you one but I'd like to hear if other people have. I see Jen, did you have one or?
Yeah, I suppose I'm just reminded of just an embo I did recently, actually, that it was an unexpected situation in that I wasn't expecting as many people in the room as I thought I was coming to do. So it was myself and I'm from an infant mental health service in Glasgow. And the way it works for us is that if we have referrals that come into us and if the baby's under 12 weeks old, then routinely they will be offered an embo. And what we like to do is join up with our health visiting colleagues that are usually the referrers and the person that the families have spoken to first about any concerns or worries that they've had, so that we can join up and share what the embo is, but like just what others have said, what the approach is, and maybe not, about the health visitor going on and being trained, but because unfortunately funding won't allow for all our health visitors to do that. I wish it did. But just to share the experience of using that approach and talking about baby states and understanding baby's first language. So the health visitor came along with me and said to me, it will just be mum and maybe dad, because it's a very quiet house and this is their first baby. And when I went along, the house was packed full of family. It had been Eid on the Friday and I was going in, I think, on the Monday or the Tuesday. And so there was lots of family staying, lots of celebrations, lots of food, lots of joy. And it was a nice, nice environment to come into, but it felt very busy. But actually, we carried on and we did it. There was some 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds around, and they were really interested in what we were doing. We had baby, in the middle of the room, and the grandparents were around as well. And although it wasn't an unexpected something coming up from the parents that they wanted to explore with me, the environment was unexpected and it was busier, but actually it was a really great opportunity to have everybody just look at the baby. And what the 3-year-olds and the 4-year-olds, they were wanting to get right in, so they were right beside me and they were right over the baby and they were right in the kind of as you would expect, in the face of the mum as well. And our wee baby, who was only 10 weeks old, was telling his cousins, I need a bit of a break. I'm feeling a wee bit overwhelmed. I'm feeling a wee bit stressed. And we were able to notice that. And mum was able to say, he's not looking at you, he's looking away. And she was saying sometimes she found that really overwhelming to have a lot of family around and to have her nieces right on top of the baby. So I think her feedback to me was she found that really helpful to be able to say, let's notice what your wee cousin's saying to you just now. Your wee cousin is looking away and he's wanting a wee bit of a break. But then when those moments passed and he wanted to, engage again, he was absolutely loving the interaction with his nieces, with his cousins. And he loved the play and you could tell he was so interested, and they were right up close, so he was able to see them and want to engage. But yeah, so I don't know if that is helpful to point out, but just, I suppose you never know what you're going into. And I suppose every opportunity is useful, isn't it? Whatever you're faced with, to find something there to help.
Oh, that's such a beautiful example. I bet Kevin would want you to write that up for the NBO International, because I think it says so many things. And before I respond to it, I'm curious if you could share with us, like, what happened inside of you when you arrived there and found this unexpected crowd of people.
I guess initially I wanted to clear the space to make sure that mum, and I didn't act on this, but I think initially I did think this might not work today. I might say to mum, can I come back? You're busy. Will I come back at a quieter time? And actually the health visitor said it's never like this. It's usually very quiet. And I think that added to me thinking, this might not work today. Let's put this back. And then as we settled and food got offered and we had a bit of an introduction chat and just a bit of a small talk, and I explained what we were going to do, it just felt like everyone was just interested. And I thought, actually, this is a really good opportunity. So I'm not going to listen to that probably get out of jail card of saying, I'll make another time when you're really, but when it's a bit less busy. Because I guess it's a bit intimidating to have all those eyes on you, but we went with it.
Yeah. So if we think about the polyvagal theory and what was maybe going on in you was this sense of threat, like, first of all, I have to perform in front of all of these people. This is not where I'm comfortable. I'm not sure this is good for the mom. But somehow what you did was, in a way that was probably out of awareness, was let yourself kind of receive the signals of the room, which sounds like it in turn made your anxiety go down. And then you were then able to engage, even though you didn't necessarily have this language for it, your not knowing stance of curiosity and listening in. And then this, talk about what happens is that this relationship with the cousins, which it also links in what I talked about very briefly about culture, which is that kids grow up in many cultures in a large environment of caregivers. I mean, it's only in, you know, sort of the Western cultures that we have this sort of model of one parent, you know, two parents and one baby. But this is the norm in many cultures, that there are multiple relationships involved. And it really teaches all of us to be mindful of that, that those relationships with those cousins, those are going to be lifelong relationships that are going to be very important to this baby and their parents, and that you then created these glorious moments of meeting between among all of them. So I think that's just a beautiful example.
Yeah, thank you.
Sophie, have you got a question for this one in the chat?
Hi, yes, I do. Sorry, I'm just with my little boy, so he's actually got the TV on. I don't know, can you hear the TV or is it okay?
We can't hear the TV.
Okay, I'll be short and quick. But thank you. I thought that was a beautiful presentation, like everyone else, so insightful. Just that I'm a trainee early years educator, and it's a school where there's babies and beyond, so it goes up to 18 years old. And my question was, like, it's difficult for babies. I'll read my question. I said that they're babies to newborns and beyond in the nursery setting, sometimes all day. This can be difficult for parents to leave and babies to let go. I wonder what's the best way we can keep the perspective of the baby and caregivers in these moments, because it's difficult. And for both these minds and the feelings, I just find as a trainee, what's the best way in these moments? Obviously, you want to soothe the baby, but also let them have their moment to say goodbye, and just your thoughts maybe around that, please.
I just want to make sure I got all of that. You're saying when they have to leave, they're in the NICU and the parent has to leave. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, you know, when parents have to drop off their babies to nursery.
Oh, nursery,
So,
like school.
yes,
Yes.
but the
Like childcare. Okay.
yeah,
Got it.
childcare, and also
Yes.
you know, they're getting small now. I know in the UK from 9 months in September, they're gonna be an influx of more babies. And just your thoughts around that.
So you're dealing with the separation anxiety of the caregiver and the baby simultaneously, and trying to hold those both in mind. Yes, the drop off is an extremely fraught time especially for 9-month-olds. So I would say there is no one answer to that. And you know, I think it's really, and there will be times when you will get it wrong. I think that probably if you're saying that the caregiver has left, you know, obviously then your primary responsibility is obviously to the baby, which makes it more straightforward. So you're saying, like, if they're both there together, how do you separate them, respecting both perspectives? Is that correct?
And like you say, every caregiver and their child and their baby is different. So some babies are willing, some babies are very unwilling. And I think it's learning. Obviously, you get to learn each baby and stuff, but every day is different too. So I think it's just, I like what you said about the perspective of the baby. It just really is that, because then they're in your care now. So how do we, you know, once they're in and they're settled, it's fine. But it's just those moments. I just wondered what you think.
Yeah, well, I think you kind of answered your question, because it is a developmental process as you get to know the baby and the caregiver, because each caregiver has their own issues with separation. And some are more comfortable with it than others. you really don't know anything about what's going on in this family. So I think it's going to be, I think at the outset, acknowledging that, especially a classroom full of new 9-month-olds, that this is a fraught time, that this does not have to be fine and okay right from the beginning. And it will be a developmental process as all of you and the caregiver and the baby all get to know each other. And I think there's often a kind of pressure that you have to get it right from the start. You have to be able to deal with whatever the parents' issues are and get the baby settled, and everything's going to be fine on the first day. And that's probably not true.
Yeah.
It is a process of getting to know each other and having some difficult moments. And if you can, I think the idea is to acknowledge that anxiety rather than feeling pressured that I have to know what to do and fix this right now. So I hope that's a sort of unhelpful, but hopefully helpful answer.
Oh, definitely. Thank you. I'll definitely keep that in mind and all what you've shared with us today. So thank you. And Brazelton, thank you. Lovely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I appreciate somebody made a comment about the sound engineer. I love that. My son actually does tech for musical performances, and he'll appreciate that. We're the sound engineer.
Any more questions or comments? Lisa, yeah, so I often use dance as a metaphor with the diets I work with. So we can bring jazz and dance into this very easily. Yeah. Hazel, you have your hand up.
Yeah, it's just it's a long time since I've done an MBO, but I'm just remembering, just because you showed the video and it was about getting the baby to follow the voice, and the stress that I would feel in case the baby didn't follow the parent's voice, and knowing that it's not an assessment, and how fast you have to think on your feet, and maybe saying things like, oh, they seem to be so interested in that light over there that they can't take anything else in the moment, but just feeling really stressed. Like, what if the parent fails and their voice doesn't bring the baby to look towards them? And just remembering that stress that I would feel and trying to calm myself down before I begin to do that piece. I was just reminded when I watched it in the video.
Yeah, well, that brings up a lot of really complicated questions, because I mean, there is a lot of, especially when you're new to doing the MBO, pressure to do all the items. But it may be that if you sort of get a sense that the baby may not be in a state to do that, it might be the better choice to not even try. On the other hand, if that is what you see, yes, it creates a lot of anxiety, because it sort of goes back to the first question. What we want is to be helpful, and we want parents to feel good about themselves. But if a parent, and I actually have another vignette in the book where the baby just does not engage in following the mother's face ever, and actually the baby came to my office because the mother thought the baby was autistic. And what we learned was that, I mean, and this was in a clinical visit. So I wasn't doing an MBO, I was doing a behavioral consultation. So we had an hour, and we discovered that the baby was really quite sensitive to a lot of sensory input, and had 2 older brothers, and was kind of protecting himself. And so when we had time and it was quiet, and we talked not in an intense, like, oh, baby kind of voice, but in a, in a more natural, that the baby was then able to fix and follow. So we kind of brought that out. But in the moment of the NBO, when you're doing the items, you might not have the expanse of space and time to make sense of that communication, in which case, yeah, I think trying to sort of patch it over with your own anxiety usually just sort of gets in your way. Yeah, I think it's a dilemma, and there are many ways to think about how to deal with that.
Thank you. There's so much to think about in that moment of meeting. I do quite like that term, isn't there? Because there are quite a lot of people in the room, and also sometimes people in the room that we can't actually see, but are very much present. So there's just so much to think about. And I think, Claudia, you've just highlighted so many things for everybody who work with parents and babies, just to be mindful of, and that kind of thing about remembering also what we bring into that relationship. And I love the culture of humility, and it's not about coming from two very distant cultures. It could be a different kind of culture within what we think is the same. So yeah, thank you so much. I don't know if there was anything you just want to see before I round up. We have got one more poll. And I also noticed that on one of your slides, there was a little code for your book, if anybody was interested in it. So any last words from you before we put up the poll?
Well, what I can do, just pertaining to the book, is I can share my screen and I can put up that slide, which has a QR code. Apologies for marketing. But I'm going to just do that. And then I will say sort of, let's see, where is it? Here we go. Oh, no. All right. So if anyone is in, because they do, this is in the UK. It's distributed in the UK. It's also distributed in the US, but not with this code. Anyway, if you do buy it in the US, it's Teachers College Press, and the code is GOLD25 for a discount. So yeah, I think I just wanted to, the last thing I wanted to say was in response to the idea of dance, because I also love dance. Actually, when I finish this lecture, I'm going to a dance class, and I think dance is a wonderful way to think about it. And Dr. Tronick talks about the difference between the Fred Astaire Ginger Rogers dance, and if you've seen the movie Dirty Dancing, where they step on each other's toes and it's very messy, and that actual relationships are both between ourselves and our clients, as well as between infants and their caregivers, are much more like the Dirty Dancing, Patrick Swayze, Jennifer Grey dance. And so it is messy, but yet over time, as you make mistakes and reconnect, then you create the beautiful dance, as they do at the end of that movie. So I thought that would be a good place to end with dance. And thank you so much for having me. It's been really a joy.
Well, we can't thank you enough. It's been so enlightening, and with the theme this week for Baby Communication Week being Born to Connect, I don't think we could have had something more appropriate. So thank you, and you really covered so many different levels. So thank you so much. And there's been a lot of positive comments in the chat. We have just got one last poll, and we really appreciate if you could just share some words that describe how today's presentation will change your practice for the better. And it just one word or a couple of words would be great. Thank you. I hope you all got that on your screen. I really love the space to be messy and get it wrong. That is that kind of repair, which is so important. Being okay with not knowing. Motivated for change within wider services. Reminded me how being curious is key. I really think that's so important too. More confidence in not being perfect myself. And being in the moment, follow baby's lead, be curious. Being comfortable with being uncomfortable. I really think you've touched on something here, Claudia, that actually is not, we shouldn't be trying to be perfect. I think that's so important. Inspiring, thought-provoking, curiosity and not knowing. Thank you for that. Informative and engaging, much food for thought. Think about what I bring and what the parent brings to the space. Thank you so much. That's wonderful. Thank you for those comments. That's really lovely. So, thank you again so much for joining us here on Tuesday morning from all over the UK, from all over the world, especially to you, Claudia. It's just been amazing having you here today. Thank you for getting up so early to join us here today. We really appreciate that. And I hope that you will join us in all the other activities for Baby Communication Week. And we'd love to hear your stories. And again, any comments that you want to share on any other social media or LinkedIn with Claudia as well. You know, please join us. And any questions, you can always email us. Okay, well, thank you so much. And I hope you all have a continued lovely Tuesday, wherever you are.